Right now, far beneath the surface of the Pacific Ocean, something enormous is on the move. A vast pool of warm water spread across thousands of miles of open sea is sliding out of place and quietly tilting the heat balance of the entire planet. Online, the headlines have already gone to war over it. A monster is coming, they say. A super El Niño that will tear apart the winter and unleash chaos from California to the coast of Africa. How much of that is real and how much is just noise engineered to scare you into clicking? This is the science behind the most powerful weather pattern on Earth, and a clear look at what it can actually do to the year ahead, with the hype stripped out. Start with the thing itself, because the name gets thrown around constantly and almost always misunderstood. El Niño is not a storm. It is not a single event you can point to on a map. It is one phase of a giant slow seesaw between the ocean and the sky over the tropical Pacific. A back and forth that scientists call ENSO, the El Niño Southern Oscillation. Out there, the ocean and the atmosphere are locked together, each one pushing on the other, and every few years the whole system tips from one mood into another. To feel how it works, think of a bathtub. Normally steady winds along the equator, the trade winds blow from the Americas toward Asia, dragging the warm surface water westward and piling it up near Indonesia. It works a little like blowing across the top of a full tub, where the water heaps up on the far side. That warm pile gathers in the western Pacific, while cooler water rises to take its place along South America. That is the ocean in its normal, balanced state. The name itself comes from the people who noticed it first. Centuries ago, fishermen along the coast of South America saw that every so often the cold, fish-rich water they depended on would turn warm and empty, and it tended to happen around Christmas. They called the warm current El Niño, the boy, a quiet nod to the Christ child. What looked to them like a local curse on the fishing season turned out much later to be the surface hint of a force that swings the weather of the whole planet. El Niño begins when those winds lose their nerve. The trade winds weaken and sometimes even reverse. With nothing holding it in place, that huge mound of warm water in the west comes sloshing back toward the east, spreading a warm blanket across the central and eastern Pacific. The bathtub tips the other way. This might sound like a local affair, a patch of warm water far out at sea. But the Pacific is not just any body of water. It covers a third of the planet. Shift that much heat into a new position and you change where the air rises and where it sinks. And that nudges the great rivers of wind we call jet streams. Move the jet streams and you move the storms they carry. A warm patch in the middle of the ocean becomes a rearranged winter on the other side of the world. That chain of cause and effect is why one ocean's mood can reach into nearly every country on Earth. So what has the scientist who watched this for a living sitting up straighter than usual? A few things stacking on top of each other. It began, as these events often do, with sudden blasts of wind from the west, brief but powerful, shoving the warm water eastward and giving the whole process its first big push. Below the surface, that warmth travels in slow, deep pulses, waves of heat rolling east a few hundred feet down, surfacing weeks later off the coast of the Americas like a delayed signal finally arriving. None of this is guesswork. Strung across the equator sits a line of anchored buoys, bobbing alone in the open Pacific, taking the ocean's temperature from the surface down into the deep, hour after hour. Floating robots drift through the water column, and satellites overhead measure the exact height and warmth of the sea. Together, they feed a constant stream of numbers to forecasters, which is how we can watch this thing build in real time instead of waiting for the floods to announce it. The satellites tell the story in color. Maps of the Pacific that should be calm shades of green and blue are streaked with angry reds and oranges, the signature of water running far warmer than it should. Forecasters line those maps up next to the great events of the past, the powerful El Niño years that older viewers will remember for their floods and wild winters, and the resemblance is close enough to keep them cautious. And one more piece makes this moment different from those past giants. The ocean was already hot before any of this began. Sea temperatures around the world have been sitting at record highs, so the event is not warming a cool, calm sea. It's stacking its heat on top of a baseline that is already elevated, a bit like lighting a fire in a room that was overheated to begin with. The official forecasters now put real odds on this growing into one of the strong ones, with a meaningful chance that it climbs into the highest category they track. Before we go further, the part that actually matters is not the scary map. What a shift like this really does is quietly load the dice. It does not carve your weather into stone, but it changes the odds of floods, droughts, and storms for billions of people, very possibly including you. So let's get specific and look at where those loaded dice come down first, starting with the threat most people worry about: hurricanes. First, that word everyone keeps using, super. You'll not find it on any official chart because Super El Niño is a media label, not a scientific one. El Niño officially begins when the ocean runs about 0.9 degrees Fahrenheit above normal for months on end, and the agencies then sort it into plain, unglamorous tiers: weak, moderate, strong, and very strong. The line is drawn by how far the ocean climbs above its usual temperature. Cross about 2.7 degrees Fahrenheit above average and you are in strong territory. Push past roughly 3.6 degrees Fahrenheit and you reach the top shelf, very strong, the rare tier where the true heavyweight events live. Only a handful of those giants have shown up in living memory, and people in the affected regions still talk about them. They are the El Niño winters that flooded California valleys, reshuffled weather on continents that rarely make the same forecast, and left a mark deep enough that scientists use them as the yardstick for everything that follows. When forecasters say this one could reach that tier, that is the company they mean. Whether the headline shouts super or not changes nothing about the physics. What the category really tells you is how heavily the dice are loaded. A stronger El Niño does not flip a switch that forces the same weather everywhere. What it does is sharply raise the probability of the extremes: the heavy rains, the dry spells, the strange warmth in the regions El Niño tends to touch. The bigger the warm patch, the harder the atmosphere leans, and the more confident forecasters can be that its fingerprints will turn up somewhere. Take hurricanes, where El Niño plays a strange double game depending on which ocean you happen to be standing beside. In the Atlantic, the basin that threatens the United States and the Caribbean, the warm phase is usually bad news for hurricanes, which is good news for people. The reason comes down to wind. A powerful El Niño cranks up the high-altitude winds racing across the Atlantic, and young hurricanes are fragile while they form. They need calm, stacked air to build their towering structure. When fast upper winds tear across the top of a budding storm, they shear its head off before it can organize, stuffing out systems that might otherwise have grown into monsters. So a strong event tends to mean a quieter Atlantic season. The catch, this time, is that overheated ocean we mentioned. All that extra warmth is hurricane fuel, and it may partly cancel out the calming effect, leaving a season that is harder to call than usual. Fewer storms perhaps, but the ones that do form could be fierce. It's no accident that some of the calmest Atlantic hurricane seasons on record have landed in strong El Niño years, while many of the most violent, overstuffed seasons have struck when the opposite phase, La Niña, took the upper hand and let the storms run wild. The ocean and the wind are quietly negotiating every summer, and El Niño is one of the loudest voices at the table. Cross over to the eastern Pacific, near Mexico and out toward Hawaii, and the pattern flips its hand completely. The very conditions that calm the Atlantic tend to energize the Pacific, warming the water and easing the winds, letting storms there grow bigger and more often. And one blunt truth is worth holding on to through all of this. Seasonal totals barely matter for any single person. It only takes one hurricane making landfall in the wrong place to turn an otherwise quiet year into a catastrophe for the people who live there. The bigger, more personal story for most viewers is the winter. This is where the warm phase leaves its clearest mark across North America, and it does it mainly by bending one specific river of wind. During El Niño, a high, fast current of air called the subtropical jet stream sags southward and powers up, turning into a kind of conveyor belt for storms aimed straight at the southern United States. For California and the southern tier, from the west coast across to Florida, that usually means a wetter, stormier season. Storm after storm can roll ashore along that southern track, and in a strong year it can pile up into serious rain and flooding, especially in California, which has watched past El Niño winters swell its rivers and bury its mountains in snow. It's the same conveyor that can turn a normally mild region into a parade of downpours. That has a flip side worth naming. For a parched Southwest, a big El Niño can be a lifeline, the kind of winter that refills shrinking reservoirs and packs the mountains with snow that slowly feeds the rivers all summer. The same storm track that threatens flood damage can also break a long drought. Whether it lands as disaster or relief often comes down to how fast the rain arrives, and on ground that was ready for it or not. Drift north, though, and the picture flips. Across the northern United States and up into Canada, the warm phase tends to bring milder, drier winters. The cold air stays bottled up farther north, the storm track slides away to the south, and the snow that northern cities count on can simply fail to show up in its usual amounts. A winter that feels strangely gentle in Minnesota can be the very same event soaking California to the bone. And this is not only a North American story. The same shift that drenches California can dry out the far side of the Pacific, bringing drought and harsh fire seasons to Australia and Indonesia. It can flip the weather in South America, flooding parts of Peru that are normally bone dry. Reaching even further, a strong El Niño can weaken the great monsoon that waters India, where a single weak rainy season touches hundreds of millions of lives. One warm patch of ocean felt on nearly every continent at once. The trickiest region of all is the Northeast and the big snow corridor around it, where forecasters turn genuinely cagey. A strong winter event can load those storms with so much warm, moist air that they arrive as rain or punishing ice instead of snow, or it can still drop a blockbuster blizzard if the timing lines up just wrong. And underneath every one of these tendencies sits one honest caveat. No two of these events are ever quite alike. These are odds the ocean is shifting, not a script it is bound to follow. Which brings us back to all that noise online and what it tends to get wrong. Let's be clear about the biggest one. This is not the apocalypse. A big El Niño does not end civilization, collapse the food supply, or crack the planet in half, whatever a breathless thumbnail might promise. It's a powerful, natural swing in a system that has been swinging for thousands of years, long before anyone was around to film it. It helps to know the tells of a fear-farming video when you see one. A melting, cracking planet on the thumbnail, a promise that something unbelievable is about to happen, a looming date by which everything supposedly changes. Honest forecasting almost never looks like that. It looks like probabilities, ranges, and careful words are likely and tends to, because the honest version of this story is dramatic enough without the costume. Where it does bite quietly is your wallet. El Niño can scorch farmland with drought across parts of Asia and Australia. And when those harvests suffer, the price of everyday things you would never link to the Pacific, coffee, rice, sugar, can drift upward on the far side of the world. The effect is real, but it shows up as a slightly steeper grocery receipt, not a disaster movie. Close to where the name was born, the bite is sharper. When that warm water spreads along South America, it caps off the cold, nutrient-rich upwelling that feeds one of the richest feeding grounds on Earth, and the vast schools of small fish that depend on it can vanish for a season. The fishermen who named El Niño centuries ago were watching the leading edge of exactly this. The ocean going quiet and warm and empty right when they needed it the most. There's also a genuinely new wrinkle, and it is the one worth taking seriously. Every El Niño in the past played out on a steady stage. This one is dancing on a stage that is itself getting warmer year after year. That background heating means each new event pushes into conditions no one has ever measured before, which makes the old historical patterns a rougher guide than they used to be. The real danger is not some sudden doomsday. It is that we are running the experiment in territory the record books have simply never seen. So, strip away the screaming headlines, and what are we actually left with? Not a single monster storm bearing down on the world, but a shift in the planet's pulse, a change in the rhythm of the great engine that drives our weather. It's not something to panic over. It's something to respect and, above all, to understand. After all, this is the planet's own thermostat cycling the way it always has, on a scale so vast it took us centuries just to notice the pattern. Think about what that really means. A few generations ago, an El Niño was something only recognized in hindsight, after the floods and the failed crops had already come and gone. These days, we catch it in the act, from buoys bobbing in the open Pacific to satellites watching the sea change color from orbit. That early warning is one of the quiet triumphs of modern science, and it is the reason a shift like this is a challenge to manage rather than a catastrophe to survive. The remarkable part is that we can see it coming, read the ocean months ahead, and get a genuine warning with time to prepare instead of simply reacting. The smart move is the calm one. Watch the data, not the headlines, while the Pacific quietly puts on one of the grandest performances in all of nature. If the idea of a slow-building disaster we can actually see coming pulls you in, there is another one already loading beneath North America, and it is far less forgiving than a wet winter. We laid out the whole threat in our video on the 2 earthquakes that will shatter America.